I just wanted to get this in before we go into the questions, because I'm sure that we will go in every different direction. Now, to some extent, it's repeating what Gemma has said, but I want to make a plea to every single person that is here. Please, please, write to your local member, whether they're Labor, whether they're Liberal, whether they're Green. Ask them to get the government to support, sign, ratify, and get other governments to support, sign, and ratify the treaty. And also ask them to support and to represent Australia at the highest level in the upcoming high-level conference on nuclear disarmament that is taking place in New York on the 14th to the 16th of May.
Thank you for your informative and quite terrifying, but hopeful as well, talk. My name's Kieran Howard from the Politics and the Pub Management Committee. I've got two questions. What is the role of the United States and the super profits of the big armaments manufacturers and of the military-industrial complex in the proliferation of the nuclear threat and the extent of their opposition to a nuclear-free world? And why is the United States so keen on the denuclearization of North Korea and Iran, but not of themselves, given the fact that the United States is the only country ever to use nuclear weapons against another country and who also have perhaps the largest nuclear arsenal in the world? Is it possible that many countries, North Korea and Iran, see their nuclear arsenals as the only means for preventing United States aggression? We need only look at US aggression against the non-nuclear states of Iraq and Libya, now failed states. So your answers to that, thanks.
I think in a sense your questions actually answer themselves. You know, why wouldn't the US give up its nuclear weapons? Because they want to keep them. I guess it's just power and arrogance that makes them think that they can continue in that way. The industry is a huge factor. It was Obama that committed $1 trillion for the next 30 years for the nuclear arsenal of the United States. And that's continuing, and also with the new nuclear posture review, that level of funding would be increasing. So the military companies generally get a huge amount of government funding, and nuclear weapons are part of that. So that's part of what we're facing, is to try to dry up the resources for these weapons. And that's something that the Don't Bank on the Bomb report specifically looks at. How is this industry financed, and how do we pick apart and how do we access it as citizens with our savings in banks or our superannuation in other financial institutions? We all have a role, and we are all probably right now actually supporting companies that are producing nuclear arms. So that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, a couple of almost little quibbles. The nuclear arms industry is not incredibly profitable, and I don't believe that the pursuit of profit is what keeps it in existence. It does funnel a lot of money through specific Congress people, and it does have powerful lobbies in the United States Congress, and indeed the congressional committees, the Special Congressional Committee on Strategic Forces is also christened, quote unquote, the ICBM caucus. So there is a tremendous ideological push for nuclear weapons to be there. The United States also doesn't actually have the world's largest nuclear arsenal. The Russians have got 200 more warheads than they have. But they're so close. I mean, one's got 6,800 warheads, the other's got 7,000 warheads, big deal. The Russians have some extremely large warheads as well, larger than anything the United States has got. And the most powerful nuclear missile on the planet is actually Chinese. It's the DF-41. It was tested not so long ago for the 8th time. It's worked perfectly every single time it's been tested. It has 10 monster warheads and a range 50% greater than anything the United States has. And no one seemed to even notice when it was tested. Funny that.
Thank you very much. I'm Joffrey Balcher from the Association for Good Government, and I'm one of the conveners of the Politics in the Pub. Australia seems to be in a dangerous position considering that, number one, it's a source of uranium. Number two, our Prime Minister has announced that it wants to be the 5th biggest arms manufacturer in the world. And given such dangers, but also given the opportunity arising from peaceful neighbors, such as the Association of Southeast Asian Nations that you've mentioned, and Pacific states, isn't it about time that Australia explores realigning its interests with its Asia-Pacific neighbors with regard to anti-nuclear strategies? Thank you.
Yes, of course. That's what we're saying. Out of all of the countries that are in nuclear weapon-free zones, there are about 110, 112 of them. Australia is the only one that has been hostile to the nuclear weapon ban treaty. It is a very bizarre state. We're sort of a deputy US base in the Pacific, and that needs to be challenged. I think at the same time there is a huge political opportunity right now, especially while Trump's threats get ever louder and ever fiercer. The Australian public is demanding some distance from that and is much more open to exploring a more independent perspective than, say, under Obama. We've done public polling, and the most recent one in September found that 73% of the Australian public wants Australia to join the ban treaty, supports the ban treaty, which is, it's really significant. And it was also fairly evenly distributed across demographics, gender, location, income, etc. It was fairly consistent. In Julie Bishop's own electorate of Curtin in Western Australia, it was 70% of her voters want her to sign the treaty. So this will hopefully become unignorable politically.
Next question.
Yeah, no daylight between the two of us on that one.
I'm Bruce Toms. With the experience of Iraq and Libya, North Korea realises that it wouldn't last 5 minutes without nuclear weapons and without powerful nuclear weapons. Now, they've demonstrated they've got them, but is it wise for the North Korean leader to keep on goading somebody like Trump, whose personality is such that it's so vulnerable that he could go off like that with the nuclear button, at the drop of a hat? So is the North Korean leader being wise in keeping on about what the weapons they've got? And we know they've got them. Everyone knows they've got them. So,
well, the North Korea's case is rather interesting because North Korea has made it very, very clear that they will only actually fire their nuclear weapons at the United States if they believe that regime change is imminent. So if they feel themselves to be under attack or under imminent attack, they will then hit the button. So in a way, that sort of sidesteps the argument, oh, but the North Koreans will know that they'll all be vaporised if they incinerate the United States, because they will only do it if they think they're going to be vaporised anyway. Now, the glitch with that is that that moment appears to be inching closer, and that it may not be very hard to persuade Kim Jong-un that he is about to be vaporised. And if that happens, if Kim Jong-un believes that the United States will do a preemptive strike against him, then Kim Jong-un will seek to do a preemptive strike, because it is always in his interest to hit the button first. And the way that sort of works out, if you wargame it, is that the only way he actually has a snowball's chance in hell is if he strikes United States command centres. So in other words, he's got to first explode a weapon in space above the United States. And the hope would be that he would make retaliation impossible by taking out the US military communication system when he does that. Now, if he'd done that in the 1980s, he wouldn't succeed in taking out the US military communications system, because there were multiple redundant electromagnetic pulse-proofed communication systems. But since then, everything has been routed through private carriers who are not interested in EMP protection. So there is at least a chance that he would actually knock out the United States' ability to communicate with its own launch sites. Wait, well, no. All of this has been wargamed through many times, and I'm quite sure he's done it many times himself. Now, the other critical points that he would need to take out are Pine Gap and Northwest Cape. Northwest Cape because it's a critical communication node for United States nuclear submarines, and because targeting information goes out through Northwest Cape, and Pine Gap because it is probably the single most critical nuclear warfighting related communication node outside the United States itself. So if Kim Jong-un does a preemptive, the logical targets are Pine Gap, Northwest Cape, Strategic Command, and a space blast above the continental United States. And I'm quite sure that's what he'd do.
I'm just wondering, I'm all supporting of banning the bomb, but how will the countries that have already got the nuclear weapons, how will they actually get rid of them without causing harm? You know, if they've got them, how are they going to destroy them without causing a problem?
So nuclear weapons cannot be uninvented, but they can be dismantled. And there's a process for dismantling them, and then the radioactive pit needs to be stored for a very long time, along with other radioactive waste. So it's quite feasible.
Okay.
I'm told that one of the most effective ways to make a nuclear weapon completely inoperable is to pour molasses into it, believe it or not. But the technical process of, first of all, they've got a lot of very fancy electronics attached to them. If you deactivate the electronics, then the nuclear weapon will not fire. If a nuclear weapon is, for example, dropped into a very high temperature fire, or if one of the ring of explosives that surrounds it is actually detonated, it pretty certainly will not give you a nuclear explosion. It'll scatter a lot of radioactive material over quite a wide area, but it won't give you a nuclear explosion, because in order to get a nuclear explosion, a bunch of shaped explosive has to implode in a very precise way, and at the exact right moment a burst of neutrons has to happen inside that. Otherwise you do not get a nuclear explosion.
Thank you, Gemma, for mentioning the MPs, Labor MPs, who haven't signed the treaty, including, disappointingly, one of them being Ed Husic, who shares the same last 4 letters as my surname, so I'll certainly get on to him and the others that you mentioned. But my question involves one of the more minor players on the scene in nuclear weapons that we haven't heard anything of for a long time, until the first time we ever heard about it, I believe, was through the whistleblowing of Mordechai Vanunu. So I was just wondering if there's been any developments that you might know of in recent years with Israel.
Yeah, Israel still sort of has that policy of not admitting, not confirming their nuclear arsenal. There is a disarmament movement in Israel that is working on exposing their nuclear weapon program and also pressuring them to disarm. But I don't really know any more about that at this point in time. So it will be a campaign to pursue and to support.
Probably 80 warheads, maybe as many as 150, but most likely not more than that. There has been some mention of Israel's nuclear arsenal at a sort of a semi-official level, with sort of shock horror all around, you're not supposed to have said that. So it is pretty sure that, yes, this arsenal is entirely real. Jericho missiles, sort of medium-range delivery capability, doesn't seem to be expanding hugely rapidly, but it just sits there, and occasionally there are rumblings of we might use it against the Iranians, God knows why.
Yeah, thanks to the speakers. Jim's my name. The first point I wanted to raise is what Gemma referred to, the fact that there's not a high level of public concern about the threat of nuclear annihilation at the moment. And I just want to give a plug for old codgers like myself who remember some films that were made years ago. I feel like we need some more popular culture to raise this issue. I'll mention a couple. One is On the Beach. Does anyone remember the film made of Neville Shute's famous book? This is just a little plug, I was actually in the film. Anyway, it was made, I'm on the beach, but you won't see me. Anyway, you'll see Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck. It's a high popular film from the 1950s Hollywood, but that was a pretty frightening film. I'll say something about that before. And then the other one is Dr. Strangelove. I mean, we should all be seeing Dr. Strangelove. My God, the war room, in Dr. Strangelove is enough to give you an enormous fright, especially in the Trump era. I wonder what the Trump war room is like. It can't be too much different to what it was with Peter Sellers playing 3 different roles. These films should be shown, and also we need more popular culture to really draw attention to these things. My question is really related to another point. That is, one of the big concerns, I think, and I think I heard about this out of the posture review or whatever it is from the US, is that they're talking about not just tactical nuclear weapons now, or something like, I think I heard a word, soft nuclear weapons, or something which is giving the idea that these are going to be fired from rifles, or that they're going to adapt modern technology to actually use a small nuclear weapon to annihilate a village or something like that. So it really worries me that they could be seriously thinking about adapting their nuclear arsenal in a high-tech manner to make it actually able to be used in a modern civil war or conflict type situation. This is terrifying. To me, this is actually probably in some ways more threatening than the North Korea standoff at the moment. If they were to start to use these kind of weapons in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, we are facing a really serious threat which would obviously become an escalation very quickly. So the technology, to me, is a very, very severe threat that's coming down the line. Thanks.
Well, I didn't know we had a film star in our midst, so that's exciting.
He was an expert.
But the US arsenal already contains tactical nuclear weapons and weapons that can be apparently dialed up or dialed down, not to the extent that you describe. I think for me what's most concerning about the Nuclear Posture Review is not the kinds of weapons they propose, because actually most of them already exist and are in the arsenals and are deployed, but just the sense to create a political policy that expands the range of uses for which the president wants to be able to consider nuclear weapons as part of the response. And it's fairly arbitrary, this idea of smaller nukes, bigger nukes. Wherever they happen, in whatever form, will leave a devastating radioactive legacy, and would be an enormous explosion that would create devastating impacts. So we can't, there's no acceptable use, there's no better form of nuclear weapon, just like there are no right hands for the wrong weapon. So we need to counter this and use this moment to build the political force against it, because I think that people are becoming much more aware of the nuclear threat. What Trump says is in headlines all the time, almost weekly. We could have probably ignored, my generation could have ignored nuclear weapons a couple of years ago, but it can't now, and this is something that I'm hearing all the time. On the popular culture stuff, yeah, I agree. We need more material dealing with this matter. Also, this treaty is very new. Barely any people even really know about it existing. More people know about ICANN's Nobel Peace Prize than about the treaty that we got it for. So we need a huge public education campaign about this, what it contains, what it means, and how to use it.
Just another couple of movies. The Day After, I think, is one of the most brilliant movies ever made. Obviously also one of the most depressing, but all of these are available on YouTube. Threads, if you want a really depressing movie, Threads. I mean, they're all brilliant as well. So, it is just, Threads is unremittingly grim. Threads. Just Google it and go to the YouTube, and you will get a full-length version of The Day After, and a full-length version of Threads. Probably one of the there's one which has become almost like a cult movie, and that's the one that's called The Miracle Mile, and it's about a guy who, I was going to say, is sort of a bit like I was when I was 30. He was sort of a bit of a geek, hasn't got a girlfriend, been looking for one for the past 20 years or so. She hasn't turned up. Well, on a certain day, she turns up. There's only one glitch with this day. The world's going to end that day. Anyway, he makes a 4 a.m. tryst to see his girlfriend, but his alarm doesn't go off, so he ends up in one of these sort of really boring, plasticky roadside diners, waiting for the girlfriend, having phoned her, she's not there, blah, blah, blah. And he goes outside and there's a payphone. Remember payphones? And the payphone rings. And on the other end of the payphone is a launch control officer who thinks he is ringing his dad, but has put in the wrong dial code. And he tells him that they're about to launch. And that, of course, in roughly an hour and a half, they will get it back with knobs on, and Los Angeles is going to be vaporised. So the next half hour is Los Angeles sort of falling apart at the seams as the news spreads that World War III is about to eventuate. It's a brilliant movie. It's incredibly well done. Yeah. There's a few other movies like that. Now, I also note that there was an article in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists not so very long ago making a plea for a latter day, a today version of The Day After.
Sorry, John, but I really don't think you're a Jason DeRosso of the anti-nuclear movie schisms, but I got called a cultural patriot by the last speaker for daring to talk about culture 30 years. Okay, the questions. John, what's wrong with Blowing in the Wind, David Bradbury, and his other anti-nuclear films? Yeah, well, there are contemporary movies out there, Gemma, and they're coming out all the time on nuclear waste, nuclear warfare, nuclear fallout. The ABC, and this is what I'd like John to answer, I understand there was a Japanese delegation in town this week talking about the aftermath of Fukushima and the tsunami, where the waste from the Pacific Ocean has already gone to America and halfway back. If anyone knows about that, I'd love to hear about that. The point I'm trying to make is we're all here worried about nuclear bombs going off, but the air we're breathing is full of nuclear particles from the last lot of bombs, and the food we're eating is full of fish that are contaminated from the Pacific Fukushima and so on and so forth. I'm not trying to say one's worse than the other, but I am trying to say is that there are aspects, the whole nuclear chain has to be opposed, right down to nuclear waste. And this is my question for Gemma. Are you coordinating with the other anti-nuclear groups in Australia, such as the anti-nuclear waste dump people in South Australia, such as the anti-war national coalition, which includes anti-nuclear war, an organisation that meets nationally and coordinates a range of anti-war groups in Australia and has a conference once a year, so you don't overlap? And how can you ignore the right-wing conservatives in the media who constantly say, no one signed the anti-nuclear treaty and it's just a few greenies in the Australian and the media and the Telegraph and that? Can you fight these people on their own turf with letters to the editor and take on the 2GB pro-war people? And the rest of you can help. You just got to ring up and be armed with a few facts and get on there, because it's liberal, right-wing fascist after right-wing fascist. Even if we get banned, put your answers up on YouTube and on the internet and spread the bloody word. And this psychological depressing thing that John was talking about, is this why we can't generate a whole new generations of activists of Gemma's age, that everyone's too scared of becoming depressed if you mention we may be nuclear obliterated, because the school kids should be mobilising. They're the ones with the energy. And where's the Green Left Weekly gone with their youth campaign? That's my question.
Yeah, so there was a lot in there, but I'll address two things that were relevant to me. Of course, I'm working with the whole anti-nuclear movement. That's where I came from before I started working with ICAN. And I just organised with Peaceful Australia Network. Yeah, and of course we're working with IPAN. We're in contact with a lot of those folks all the time. So we're a network of groups in Australia as well. And we did just organise with the anti-nuclear movement a speaking tour called Making Waves, which is the one that you referred to. Peace Boat, which is a Japanese NGO that charters a passenger ship, carries about 1,000 people at a time. It goes on world voyages. They just came to Australia for the first time in 10 years, and I was lucky to get on the ship in Fremantle, and we did a speaking tour in Fremantle, Adelaide, Melbourne, Hobart, and finished up in Sydney just on Monday. And travelling on that ship were atomic bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, former dairy farmers from Fukushima, and as well as nuclear test survivors from Australia. And for some of the legs from Adelaide to Melbourne, there were Aboriginal people who were resisting the imposition of a radioactive waste dump on their land in the Flinders Ranges, Adnyamathanha people, as well as Gugutha people who have also been affected by the nuclear bomb tests and whose families have fought against the Olympic Dam uranium mine, and also won the first campaign against radioactive waste, the Irati-Wanti campaign, in the early thousands. So we're drawing the connections because it is a chain that is fully connected, and we're aware of that. And nuclear weapons is just the ultimate culmination of what you can do with these radioactive rocks. So we're drawing the threads together, and that's how we're building the campaign.
What about high school kids and depression, psychological depression? Can you address the younger generation with these issues, or are they too scared to even think about it?
So ICANN started with this idea of combining humour, horror and hope. So you can't just talk only about the horror, because of course nobody wants to hear that. They don't want to walk away from just hearing about the horror. So it needs to be combined with some hope. You've got to have a direction, you've got to have somewhere to go, and also you've got to have fun with it along the way. So I like that triplet, the humour, horror, hope, and I try to maintain that.
I focused on the horror because I knew that I was a double act with Gemma. And that double act, I think, works reasonably well. You've got to kind of take both of us. In terms of the popular culture, I do think that there is a need for contemporary movies that take up where the war game, where the day after and so on left off. And I'm certainly not the only person that thinks that. I'm echoing what a lot of other people have said. And I think that there's a little bit of a challenge out there for filmmakers. If you can make a 2018 World War III movie, perhaps starring Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, we would... Tom Lehrer's soundtrack would be great, actually. But maybe there are some more slightly contemporary things that we can use as well. I think you need to be able to draw on that reservoir of popular culture from decades back, and you also need to reference stuff which people will recognise right now.
I can only speak with personal experience with atom bombs. I was in Melbourne for the Olympic Games, and I didn't know what to do, and somebody said, "Would you like a lift to Western Australia?" I said, "Oh, that's a good idea." It's not funny. This fellow had a Volkswagen combi van and he repaired windmills. And so we set off, and I just arrived from England, and I didn't know Australia very well at all. And we were travelling along, and he said, "Would you like to go to Woomera, where they just exploded the atom bombs?" I said, "Oh, well, there's something to talk about, I suppose." And so we went to Woomera, and there were kind of wrecks of this and wrecks of that, and because they've all been in the newspapers a bit. But what intrigued me was it was very sandy, but it all turned to glass. Now, I don't know how far the depth that the glass was, but it was quite a big area where the heat had turned all the sand to glass, you know. That was my experience of Woomera. Now, I was in Japan a couple of years ago, and I was with a group, and they said, "How would you like to go to Hiroshima?" I said, "Oh, that'd be interesting." And so we go along to Hiroshima, and it's a beautiful city now, because where the bomb actually exploded is a massive, great big park. but I don't recommend anybody to go to the museum there. It's the saddest place of what's happened to human beings and atom bombs that you'd ever see. But so that's my personal experience with atom bombs. Thank you.
Hello, Michael Hattrick's the name. I'd like you to speak to the dangers that could be presented by the way of fundamentalist religious teaching, such as the fundamentalist Christian teaching around it at the time of President Ronald Reagan and his attitude towards global annihilation. Does it still exist? Has it taken another form with President Trump? And what might it be? Thank you.
There was a terrific interview done sometime in the early 1990s with the then chairperson of the Senate Select Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defence, who was both an extreme fundamentalist Christian and from the extreme right wing of the Republican Party. And basically the journo sort of sticks a mic in front of this guy and asks him, what does he think about nuclear winter? And he's expecting a reply, oh, it's all, scientific mumbo-jumbo and bullshit and so on. And instead what he gets is, the righteous will be raptured to heaven. Unfortunately, the rapture cult also had an unhealthy influence over President Bush Jr.'s administration. And it's said that President Bush Jr. Asked for foreign policy advice from certain members of the rapture cult. So it's a real ongoing problem. I suspect that President Trump may not be so directly influenced by the rapture cult, but he has his kind of own rapture cult within him.
So do you want me to just say, or have you got something to say to that? No. Okay. Oh, look, I just wanted to say, I think we're finished. Anyway, so can you all thank Gemma and John for a fantastic talk tonight. Gemma has to go very, very shortly to catch a train. But just for next week, please come again. It's lovely to see you all here. Next week, it's Crisis in Venezuela, Challenges Facing the Bolivarian Revolution. So I hope to see you all here again next week. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.